Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Everybody warmed up now with our Kabbalat Shabbat singing. Hopefully the blood is pumping, the air is getting that heat going from inside. Maybe. It depends on exactly how thick your blood is. But that is kind of the acclamation that is a continuation of our conversation last week. For those of you that weren't here, and no test for those that were. Last week we talked about the difficulty of beginnings, about how hard it was for the Israelites to imagine that they could leave Egypt, that there would be a new start, that their slavery would come to an end, that beginning was just so hard for them to imagine. But on the flip side, we also have to look at the change in world perspective that was necessary for their captors, for the Egyptians. And they also had a rough time, not to excuse what they did, but perhaps we can sympathize not with why they were going through it, because holding another nation as slaves is a terrible thing, but in our own life too, we are often stuck in slightly downscaled but similar circumstances. Let's take a look at what they had to face. They knew that there was a problem coming down the pipe. This man from out of the wilderness who once lived in the palace showed up and said that God was going to overthrow their entire world, that there were going to be plague after plague after plague that would wreak havoc not only on their economy but ultimately on them. The reasonable thing to do after he had first demonstrated his power would be to just say, okay, you know what? Egypt has existed for 2,000 years without the Israelites as slaves. We will exist just fine without them. Off you go. Why take the risk of actually incurring the wrath that had already begun to be seen just in the discussion with Pharaoh and the whole stakes and all of that? Why go anymore? Fine. You want to leave so bad? Off you go to the wilderness. Good luck to you. By the way, we'll still be your neighbor. We can reconquer your country anytime we feel like it. Let's avoid all the disaster. That would have been the rational thing to do in the face of Moses' initial demands. But they didn't, because after all, his initial acts, not so impressive. Right? The whole, my stick can beat your stick. Okay, fine. I'm not really quaking in my sandals. On the other hand, when he turned the river into blood, and when the Sephardim, the frogs, began to come out, well, what would the average Egyptian have said to him or herself? We can deal with this. We are a strong, we are a proud people. We can easily just dig new wells. We can easily shoo the frogs away, and it will be an annoyance. It will be an inconvenience. But we are not going to capitulate in the face of this, because after all, it's not that bad. Right? We can live like this if we have to, in order not to surrender. We can all see ourselves in that. Sometimes a problem is looming down the way, but we can see already the first ripples of it. And we say, it's not that bad. Okay, the car's making a funny noise, but it's not that bad. I don't need to take it to get in. I don't have to take it in to get looked at. I can live with this. Okay, fine. My boss is asking more of me and not giving me a raise and firing other people from the office. It's not that bad. I can live with this. Because after all, the alternative would be harder, would be scarier. I'm okay. It's not too bad. Surely that was the Egyptians' first phase of dealing with the plagues as they were unfolding in their country. The next phase, okay, this is bad. This is bad. We've got boils, we've got these wild beasts, we've got all of these scratchy bugs all over us. This is actually significantly worse. And this is something I'd rather not have in my life. But I'm not sure that we're going to give in. Because now my resolve has stiffened. You think you can bully me? You think you can make me give up? No. I am going to see this out because I am made of tougher stuff than this. I can endure anything you throw at me, no matter how horrible it is, because I am a strong Egyptian. I am not going to give in to this threat. Again, all of us, I'm sure, at different points have sympathized either nationally, communally as Jews, of not giving in to the face of terrorism and hate. We've also probably personally not wanted to give in to problems either in our work, in our family, with our neighborhood. We want to show that we have that backbone, that we have that spine. Then, of course, the next stage, before we get to the final one, well, now people are actually dying. Now people are actually being injured on a regular basis. Now our economy is being absolutely destroyed by everything that is taking place. So now we give in? No, of course not. Because now we have reached the phase of the sunk cost fallacy. And if you're not familiar with that term, trust me, you're familiar with that feeling, which is we've come this far. If we give in now, if we change now, then we will be wasting everything that we had put into this point. It is what keeps the gambler at the slot machine saying, I've already put $500 into this machine. I am not walking away until it pays me back, because then I will have to admit that $500 was wasted. Whereas the logical thing to do would be to say, you know what, that $500 is never coming back, and every dollar I put into it is only another dollar gone, so maybe I should leave. But that's not the way the human mind works on average, and most of us have very average minds. And that means that we're going to keep putting it in and putting it in, good money chasing bad, good opportunities being gone in order to buttress the bad decisions that we have already made. And the Egyptians get trapped in this state. They are not going to give up now, because to give up now would be to say that all of the resolve that they had shown and all of the suffering they had endured was a waste of time. And what would that mean? How stupid would I feel to realize I didn't have to go through the frogs, I didn't have to go through the lice, I didn't have to go through the wild animals. We could have just let them go in the first moment and we wouldn't have had to do that. Well, now that I've done it, by gods, because they had a lot of the gods, we are not going to give in at this point. And of course, we have to recognize that the average Egyptian would have been trying to stiffen their resolve. But ultimately, who was actually responsible for the final decision regarding the Israelite slaves? Pharaoh, right? Paro. He was the one that was ultimately the nation. He was ultimately Egypt himself. And if we think carefully, he would not have been terribly affected by any of the plagues up to this point. Maybe he got an itch here or there. Maybe he got a boil. Maybe. But do you think he was out digging a new well when he needed fresh water? Do you think he was shooing the frogs out of his rooms when they were causing trouble? Do you think he was troubled by wild beasts? Do you think that he was going to run out of food when the plagues were destroying the crops out in the field? No. He would be the last person to suffer. Just as in the modern world, the tyrant are the last to suffer from economic sanctions, so too, Pharaoh would have been the most insulated from the actual suffering that the plagues were incurring for his nation. Now, a good leader is supposed to recognize that whether he or she is comfortable, if the nation is in trouble, that they have to help the nation. But Pharaoh was not a good leader, definitely not a role model that we should aspire to look to for advice on how to govern. But it does also explain why eventually the final plague had to be exactly what the final plague was: the killing of the firstborn. Why? Not just because it was justice for the killing of all the Israelites that Pharaoh had ordered many years prior, from which Moses was miraculously saved, but because this was a plague that would affect everyone. Specifically, as the Torah says, from the lowest of the status in Egypt all the way up to Pharaoh's household. This would affect everyone. Pharaoh could not hide, he could not insulate himself, and it was something that no one could say was worth the cost. That this was something that they were willing to endure, because no one really wants to sacrifice their child. And yet they risked it anyway. And yet, even when they were warned that this was what was coming, they said no. We are willing to endure it. And of course, what happened? When the tragedy actually struck, it turned out that their hearts broke, and so did their resolve. And all of that could have been avoided if, when Moses had first shown up and said, I have a legitimate grievance, my people deserve better than what you are doing for them, let them go, Egypt could have avoided all of the plagues, all of the suffering, all of the devastation, and all of the death, simply by making that decision at the beginning. It's a lot to expect of them because, as I said, in our own lives and in our own larger communities, we sometimes make those same mistakes. But that means we need to learn from the Torah, and we need to do better for ourselves. When we can see a disaster looming on the horizon, don't pretend like it's not going to happen. Don't pretend like you can be insulated from it. Don't pretend like, well, I've already come this far. Even though that disaster is coming, I don't want to lose what I have somehow wasted in defending myself against it. Change. Yes, those beginnings are hard, like we talked about more last week. But we have to sometimes. Sometimes we have to recognize the danger that is coming, even though it is going to cause us discomfort, even though it would cause us loss, even though it would be a wrenching alteration of how we live. Sometimes that's what we have to do. It is difficult, it is painful, but compared to what's coming down that pipe in 9 more plagues, it's a whole lot better that we make the right choice now. Don't wait to figure out if it'll be as bad as it looks. Don't wait to see what will truly occur. Assume that it is what it appears to be. It is a disaster up there, and thank God that we can spot it in advance and actually have an alternative way to travel, that we have choices to make, that we are not victims of fate forced into that circumstance, but that each and every one of us can make a choice each and every day to deviate from the course that we are on, leading us to whatever problem is looming for us, and find a better way. This is the lesson that the Exodus gives us among many, many others, and one that each of us can carry forward to guide ourselves, not only to celebrate the history of our people, the beauty of Torah, but also just to have that gratitude that God cared enough to tell us, you're not stuck where you are. You do not have to do this. There is a different way. The plagues are optional. Shabbat Shalom.